Hello and welcome to the AIM Summit webinar on UAE and Israel investment opportunities. It's a historic moment and I'm glad to be here hosting the session today. I'm your host, Zachary Cefaratti, CEO and founder of Dalma Capital and strategic partner of AIM Summit. We have so many audience members joining us today. It is really a popular session. We have people participating from over 35 countries, including institutional investors, family offices, high net worth individuals, and many leaders of the financial services industry. We're going to be starting the session with some brief keynotes and a fireside chat, followed by an open Q&A session for the audience. Feel free to put your questions into the Q&A dialogue you'll see at the bottom of your screen. As they come, we will address those questions towards the end of the session. If you're joining us after the session on YouTube, please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's my pleasure to be introducing our first speaker today, Jonathan Medved. Jonathan Medved is an Israeli serial entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of OurCrowd, the leading global equity crowdfunding platform for accredited investors and angels. OurCrowd has $1.4 billion in commitments and has invested in over 200 companies and funds, seeing almost 40 exits since its launch in February 2013. Bloomberg Business Week has said that on May 7th, 2015 edition, that OurCrowd was hands down the most successful equity crowdfunding program in the world, or platform in the world right now. I actually also had the pleasure of seeing John speak at the SALT conference in Abu Dhabi. So far as I know, he was one of the first Israeli businessmen to be speaking at such a conference and at such a prominent event in Abu Dhabi. And I was very impressed to have seen him there. So it was a pleasure to welcome him back digitally into the UAE for our session.
Thank you, Zach. I'm going to go share a slide now. There you go. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I understand 35 countries is a great number. I'm going to take you on a quick little overview of what we're doing here in the Israeli tech system, what we're doing at OurCrowd, and our perspective on the opportunities that are enormous between us and the UAE. And obviously, please give us your questions. We like questions big time. This is a historic moment. There's no question that this peace treaty, which was just signed, is a huge milestone, which will allow companies like ourselves and many of you on the call today to start doing things that we never could have dreamed of doing before. It turns out that Israel, as you know, is really one of the world's most innovative economies. And it used to be that I'd have to show slides like this from the Israeli embassy or a Zionist organization. Today, the World Economic Forum does our work for us and have named Israel as #1 in terms of innovative companies or attitudes towards entrepreneurial risk or companies disrupting the world. If you look at this in a dollar and cents framework, you'll see that over the last decade, the dollars invested in Israeli tech companies have gone consistently up. And actually this year, the year of COVID, will be another up year. We're having an up year at OurCrowd, thank God, alhamdulillah, as we say, or Baruch Hashem in Hebrew. But we're expecting that this number will be about $10 billion invested. So this is a very significant tech ecosystem here in this country. More important than investments is exits. And as Zachary mentioned, we've had 40 exits at OurCrowd. Last year, about $20 billion in exit value. Obviously, the 2 years of 17 and 19 dominated by relatively large exits, from Mobileye at over 15 billion to Intel, and Mellanox to NVIDIA for almost 7 billion. And in fact, this has been the theme here, which is that Israeli companies, which have for a long period of time been known for their entrepreneurial energy, are now exiting at billion-dollar plus numbers. In fact, if you can't exit for $1 billion, you're probably not going to make the headlines the way that you used to for even a couple $100 million. Our platform is a very, very diversified platform across sector, stage, and geography Turns out about 60% of our investments are in the Israeli ecosystem, but already 40% are outside, mostly in the US, but we're now starting to hunt in the UAE, and we hope that over the next couple of months we'll be able to announce our first companies. And they run from enterprise software to ag tech, from food tech to healthcare, semiconductor and optics to mobility, you name it. And then there's a whole series of funds that we have, over 20 of them, and incubators. Again, as Zachary mentioned, we have a number of companies who've really made waves. We have a company called Wave, was bought by H&R Block for over 400 million. But last year we were fortunate enough to be investors privately in Beyond Meat, which of course had the best IPO of 2019. And this year, the best debut of an IPO was Lemonade. So we're starting to, hit not just good deals, but the deals that are sort of the marquee deals, at least on NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, as well as selling our companies to household names like Microsoft, Intel, and others. What's also exciting is the fact that, again, I mentioned this highly diversified nature of our platform. If you take Fast Company's most innovative company list over the last 5 years, the 50 in the world, it turns out that 20 of our companies have been on this list. And no, we do not own any shares in Fast Company. We just invest in a lot of cool companies that they pick up. And if you look at what the range of some of these companies are, Lemonade, of course, is recreating insurance, now valued at about $3 million on Wall Street. BioCatch, which uses behavioral biometrics to prevent fraud. Actually, a round of $145 million invested was led by Bain just recently this year. Daily Pay, allowing employees to get out from under payday lending. It gives you access on a daily basis to their monthly earnings. In the cybersecurity area, Israel, of course, quite a superpower there. 20 cents of every dollar invested around the world in cybersecurity is invested in Israel. Our company CyberX, just recently bought by Microsoft to bulk up their IoT security. Kenna, a US cybersecurity company doing threat detection, and ThetaRay, again, another financial security company doing well. In mobility, we're looking not only at autonomous cars, companies like Innoviz, who have announced a deal with BMW to actually be launching their laser radar systems in the coming year. Cardica, competing with Mobileye, believe it or not, on what's called ADAS, or advanced collision avoidance systems. And Skytran, yes, indeed, that's what you see. It's real. And it's a flying car attached to a rail. You'll be seeing that in Mumbai probably first, and hopefully then in Dubai. In the healthcare area, we're very, very strong. We have companies like Alpha Tau, who are literally wiping tumors out by injecting a new radioactive dart. And in their first human trials, they had 100% efficacy in terms of reduction of tumor size. 80% totally destroyed the tumors. Zebra Medical, using artificial intelligence to help radiologists interpret these images. In Tech, using focused ultrasound to deal with essential and Parkinson's tremor. In the ag tech area, we're very strong with companies like Tyrannus, who do aerial surveillance of big data. Tevel, which uses drones to pick fruits, maybe someday dates, and soil sensors from CropX that are being used to manage both irrigation and fertilization. In the energy area, you have companies like Empress, which is actually famous for powering Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile defense, but actually today controls the grid. Locust View, which builds infrastructure for natural gas. Juganu, which does smart lighting with embedded high-performance wireless communication. And you look at a variety of these companies in the AI area. AI, of course, a very strong suit in Israel, where we're number 3 in the world, just after China, in terms of the number of AI startups. Companies like Halo, who are just in the news, TechCrunch last day or so, about their edge processor, which is really changing the way that companies will be able to process for artificial intelligence. See-Through, which is giving you an AI-guided ability to know at the airport when we start using them again, God willing, whether you're smuggling things or MedAware, to make sure that the doctor is not prescribing you the wrong drug, tested at Harvard, by the way. And in some of the recent deals we've done, this incredible company called Site Diagnostics just raised $71 million. Our co-leaders there were the Koch brothers, Ripple, which is doing essentially a plant-based alternative to milk. So it's like our investment in Beyond Meat, but for milk. And MigVax, which is our newest effort for the vaccine. And we have an oral vaccine in development, which is already in animal trials, and thank God is doing very, very well. So we look that when we look at the Emirates, just to bring this to a conclusion, we look at finding partners who want to make investments with us, working with government entities, working in the corporate business development side to find markets for our companies, and to do a lot of events like this one. You look at our platform, it includes these hundreds of companies, the dozens of funds, but also 55,000 individual accredited investors around the world and hundreds of institutions, all working to democratize access to the venture capital asset class. Today, actually, we're over 55,000. Our companies are maturing, so we have now over 60 that are valued over $100 million, and we're making lots of investments. Every year, we're making between 35 and 45 new company investments, together with about 60 follow-on investments. So there's adequate opportunity to go look at our website. I think I'm going to leave it here and turn it over back to Zachary, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Zachary.
Thank you, Jonathan. Excellent introduction. Actually, we already have a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A. So again, encourage those. We actually had some questions even submitted in advance of the session. So be sure to get your questions in so we can address as many as possible at the end. Actually, Jonathan, it was also asked whether you'd be willing to share the slides with the audience members. If so, the AIM Summit team can distribute those.
Absolutely. Love to.
Excellent. Super. So for those of you who are asking, you'll all be receiving an email after the session with a copy of the slides. It's without further ado that I hand over to an alumnus of AIM Summit and our good friend, Dr. Sabah Al-Banali. Dr. Sabah is the CEO of Universal Strategy, an Emirati businessman and active investor and entrepreneurial leader with a track record of financing, building, and growing companies in the MENA region. He's experienced in building startups, driving growth in young companies, and transforming mature companies. Dr. Al-Banali served as the vice chairman of the board and the chairman of the investment strategy committee of the National Investor, as chief investment officer and CEO of credit at Shua Capital, director of the board and member of the audit committee of Credit Suisse Saudi Arabia, chairman of Zawiya, founder and CEO and CIO of Safar Capital, and head of treasury and the investment division at Union National Bank. He has a PhD from Columbia University with a dissertation on competitive analysis of risk-taking and evaluation of financial derivatives. He has a BSc from Princeton University and received his diploma in company direction from the UK Institute of Directors. Such a prestigious background. Again, a dear friend, one of our favorite speakers. Thank you again, Dr. Sabah, for coming back and joining us today on this historic session.
Thank you for having me. I think we need to shorten my bio to businessman and entrepreneur at large. But thank you for having me. Thanks, John, for leading that. I'd like just to highlight a few points in terms of more at the macro level of where I see investment flows and why I see interesting opportunities between Israel and the UAE. Based on my experience in the UAE working with companies from other countries. The first thing I think that's quite important is the sizes of the economies of the UAE economy and Israel's economy. The UAE's is slightly larger. However, they're the same order of magnitude, between $350 to $400 million a year. Why is this important? A CEO of an American company once said to me, you know, you guys, your market is smaller than the economy of Trenton. You know, why would I expand business operationally wise at the UAE? Doesn't make sense, just a sales team. For Israel and for the UAE, when they look at each other, the reverse, of course, for UAE companies is that they can't grow large enough to then compete with US, European, and some other economies around the world in Asia. And so what's interesting here is that the UAE and Israel have economies about the same size. So it's something they've managed. Going into the other market makes sense. It provides a material opportunity. And that's a first interesting new, let's say, facet that we haven't faced too much when looking at the rest of the world. The second thing I'd say that's very interesting is looking at financial capital versus human capital. The UAE has been blessed with natural resources, and this has given it domestic financial capital far in excess of its small citizenship. And this is the reason why our sovereign wealth funds deploy the excess capital outside. When you look at Israel, it's the reverse. And from where I sit, I'm not an expert on Israel. I focus on the UAE and the GCC. But what it looks like is, given the immigration policies in Israel, given the global Jewish community, the human capital in Israel has grown much faster than domestic financial capital can support to unlock its full potential. Here, what we see is a surplus of one type of capital in one economy can cover the deficit of the other sort of capital in the other economy. So that, again, makes it for a good fit here. The third point is physical proximity. The time zone differences with the UAE is just 1 hour, and it's a 3-hour flight. You know, even though with COVID, we're doing a lot of remote work, a lot of remote webinars, in the end, face-to-face meetings and in-person meetings are essential for success. It's a 3-hour flight. It's a 1 zone time difference. You can literally go for the day and come back. I've done this going to Jeddah. Go in the morning, have my important meetings, and come back. So this is not even a flight. I can see it becoming almost like a bus shuttle, where you can fly in and out for the day, overnight, for the week, and that adds even more to it. The last part is I'd say that both economies are integrated globally. They are globally sophisticated. This is not one economy is coming out of developing market status and is opening up to the world where there's a rush. These are two economies that are already well integrated. It's just that this doorway between them has now opened, which I think creates a lot of interesting opportunities, because the space is open for collaboration between companies in each economy. So that's sort of my macro level view and what got me excited to look at further opportunities that this has opened up. Over back to you, Zachary.
Excellent. So thank you again for that introduction. I love the way you've kind of put this into context, how there's a surplus of financial capital that can fill a deficit and this excess human capital and these great companies that have been coming out of Israel and innovating. And certainly that will be a central part of this new status quo. But actually, I wanted to take a step back and kind of just recap what was the status quo. Again, in 1972, there was a federal law passed in the UAE that had actually issued a boycott against Israel, and that has now been repealed in its entirety. So, you know, if maybe Jonathan, if you might be able to share from the Israeli perspective, what was the historical relationship between the UAE and Israel? Are we talking about going from 0 to 100 now? What was the status quo before this and between 1972 and now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Zach. And I'll tell you, it's really not going from 0. We're probably going, if I had to make an assessment, we're now from 20 to 60 on the way to 100. There was a relationship, there has been, it was described in the New York Times as the worst kept secret in the Middle East, the relationship between the UAE and Israel. And that relationship involved all kinds of things. Some things we won't discuss here, but certainly there were many companies involved. In fact, I had a company prior to setting up ArcRoute in 2013 called Veringo, which was a video sharing and application company. And our first customers, actually our first big customer was Etisalat, okay? And we came, and traveled to Dubai and throughout the Arab world, by the way. And we were doing deals with Rotana and with Du in Kuwait. And people knew that we were Israelis, but they still did business with us. And in fact, that became a little dicey when that company had to file its S1 for a public offering. We were afraid that the gig was up and that we'd be in trouble. But the managers, and this was back, by the way, in 2008, 9, and 10. So that's 12 years before the peace. I was at SALT where we met Zachary in December. And I remember when I was invited to speak, I was quite open to the organizer. I said, look, I'm from Israel. Do you mind if I talk about Israel? He goes, we don't mind. We want you to talk about Israel. And you could sense that things were changing. So this relationship existed. It's just now gone into hyperwarp. And what's happening now is that literally every day I'm spending as much as half of my time now on this developing relationship. Things are moving very fast. The commonality of interest that Sabah pointed out are so unbelievably strong that I think that this is going to be impactful, not just for the two countries, but for the entire region, and I dare say the world. The ability of these two countries to work together is really something that everybody should salute and get behind.
Zachary, can I just add my 2 cents?
I was about to ask, yeah, please.
So I think what's important to understand is that this wasn't the Abraham Accord is not a peace accord. There was never any animosity. This was a normalization. So whatever the legal status about being able to do business, there was no animosity here between the government or the people with each other. So there's no cultural issues here. What we're talking about is that the opportunity is now in place. And I think that some people who might not understand that this is a normalization, not a peace, that there is no animosity to overcome, might be surprised at the speed with which we are seeing commercial and investment and business ties between the two countries.
So, yeah, thank you so much. Exactly. So, so Jonathan, actually, you had discussed some of the opportunities, the incredible opportunities that there are in Israel. A question from Lottie Tant is, what is the appetite for Israeli investors investing into the UAE? And also for going both directions, do you think that there are any cultural barriers that could continue to provide impediments to investment?
Okay, so let me start with a cultural question. I think exactly the opposite. I think that there are cultural warmth factors and familiarity. It's like, discovering, or rediscovering long lost cousins. This is family, okay? And the cultures, in my opinion, are different. Look, Israelis are not particularly polite. They're a little bit in your face and very direct. In fact, there's no word in Hebrew for tact, okay? And it, right. So we'll have some, we're not very polished, but on the other hand, we believe very strongly, we're all, children of Abraham, and we believe strongly in hospitality and in building a big open tent. I think both countries are very committed to excellence and innovation. I mean, look at what UAE is doing in terms of launching probes to Mars and astronauts on the space station. Israel is the startup nation. I think the key issue here is going to be taking a long-term view. Okay, and I think we have to urge people who are excited and want to move forward. Let's do this, but keep on thinking that this is a long game. And in particular, in the venture capital arena, you're not investing for a quick buck in 6 months. If you're doing that, then you're in the wrong game. Venture capital is about years and sometimes even a decade. And I think that what we're talking about here is building the foundation of a centuries, long and maybe millennia long positive relationship. And taking that view is critical in terms of making sure. And I really think that the cultural side is not going to be the issue. You asked a question also about Israelis investing in the UAE. We're quite intent on doing so. We've already started looking at companies. We think that there are very interesting companies in the UAE, but also there are opportunities to take some of the Israeli core technologies and to work with groups of UAE entrepreneurs to develop joint ventures that are not just selling a product, but are finishing, completing, developing. We're already looking at potentially not only opening an office in the UAE with announcements to come that might be of interest to this group, but also doing research and development in the UAE as well, because we think that this is not just about, one side being, I think mentioned in the questions, an ATM, and the other side, getting FDI, but it's about cross-border investments, and more importantly, about eye-to-eye level cooperation and building together.
Dr. Sabah, I'd love to pass the same question over to you with how you see this is a two-way street. What are there deals that you've seen happen or that are happening going in both directions, or is this just a one-way kind of trade?
No. I think let's be clear. The UAE and the sovereign wealth funds are highly sophisticated. This is not an ATM. They've been investing around the world. If you look at one of the oldest sovereign wealth funds in the UAE, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, it was incorporated in 1979. So this is not about just throwing money around. That's number one. Number two, for those of you who know me, especially in the UAE and the GCC, I'm not just about being a deal partner. I'm also an operating partner. What excites me more than just doing a deal is building companies. And if you look at sort of two of the more famous ones that I've worked on, one was Zawiya, a business media company that we sold to Reuters, a global company, and even though Reuters has been present here. And then another one was an investment bank in Saudi we sold to Credit Suisse. Now, doing those types of deals means you got to get to a certain size and be in certain highly specific sectors to get the attention of these global giants. What I see as very interesting, and as John said, on the operating side, we go back to the two economies are about the same size, and so it makes a lot more sense. I see a lot of more opportunities of working together. And there's a rich history in both countries of having having lots of different nationalities working together. The UAE hosts probably now with the normalization, it hosts every single nationalities from every single country. This is not new to us. Investing with everybody is not new, and building operating companies is not new. And quite frankly, I think far more important than investments, you're going to see is the joint ventures with the merchant families. Again, the sovereign wealth funds, given their size, will do big ticket items, But the startup nation of Israel, the VCs, the entrepreneurial spirit, this actually goes to a usually much smaller ticket size, still large, but you're talking about merchant families, the professional services sector and employees there. So I see the ties as being operational, and that's why I talked earlier about how having such a short trip between the two countries, a short travel trip, is very important, because that's what's going to be, I think, in the end, the long-term driver. It's faster to make financial investments, but what we're going to see is operating joint ventures that will be, I think, the most lucrative in the long run.
So actually, very interesting question, kind of referring to, this being a two-way street. So actually an interesting question from Robbie Corey. I'm a partner at MEVP, one of the leading VC asset managers in MENA. We are UAE based and UAE regulated. The technology ecosystem in Israel is very, very well funded, with easy access to all large VC investors from the US, Europe, and China, and to IPOs on NASDAQ. The MENA technology ecosystem is extremely thinly funded. MENA spends less than 0.02% of GDP on technology investments, while India, I believe that's a typo, meant Israel, spends 0.5%. Our MENA technology ecosystem needs Israeli capital, not the other way around. I'd love to have you both respond to that. Possibly if Sabah could start, and then Jonathan.
Yes, first of all, hi Rabia, how are you? It's been a long time. I think the issue here is not capital. The issue is the risk-taking mindset and the risk-taking and risk management mindset. So having someone like our crowd who has that mindset, who's ready to deploy capital, I think will attract capital from Israel, from the UAE, and from around the globe, which is what they do. They have a platform of over 50,000 investors. And what we're really looking for are investors who are willing to deploy that capital in a large way and bring a large, not huge institutional approach. But again, our crowd is a good example. Because of their 50,000 investors, a large percentage of that will see the ticket size of the types of deals MEVP do, and I know them very well, and can attract them. The issue here is our institutional investors, right? Ticket size is so big that they can't get involved. What is important from our crowd is not so much the Israeli part, but the crowdfunding platform that allows a very large number of investors to get involved and to aggregate these small amounts. So the aggregation capability, the capability to plug the UAE into a global platform, I think works very well. How someone like MEVP might benefit from that with someone with our crowd, I think that, Rabia, is for you to have a chat with John. But I think that it is the processes, the platform, ability to bring a global interest from the right type of investors.
Yeah, I first of all, I think that nice to meet you, Rabi, and a great question. I think that there will be a real move of Israeli companies coming not just to the region to seek investment and to sell product, but to develop companies together. And I think that this is a case of 1 + 1 = 11, not 2. There'll be lots of synergy here. And I think that together, when funds or platforms like our own are working together, we can really leverage our strengths. I mean, I think one of the things that we do well is we market the startup nation and the whole brand very well. I think that UAE punches way above its weight class in terms of some of these areas, but people don't know how strong it is. So for example, there's nowhere stronger in logistics than the UAE, right? In other words, you guys rock. it's about as good as it gets. But that's also true for smart cities, for fintech, in certain areas of transportation, obviously anything having to do with energy. These are important areas. And I think that we have a lot to learn. And we have fintech companies that would be delighted to work with players in the region to develop their technology. And smart cities is so nascent and so ready to take off. It's very hard to find two smarter cities than Abu Dhabi and Dubai, frankly. And I think that these are the areas where, as they become appreciated, people are going to be pouring money into that MENA and get that percentage of GDP way, way up.
Well, this is extremely exciting because it sounds like we're getting a deal done right here. MEVP, our crowd getting together. Based on the Q&A, it sounds like there's business to be done there. You mentioned actually logistics. We have a logistics fund on our platform here at Down the Capital, so we'll be following up with you as well. But yeah, exactly. I mean, these things are exciting, playing on the strengths of the different regions. Another question from the audience, Carla Dorsch has asked about the UAE's close tech relationship with China. And how a lot of this potential investment and collaboration with Israel will be focusing on tech. Do you see any frictions? Do you see any challenges? Do you see market share being taken away from the Chinese, or everybody being able to play nice? Possibly, again, starting with John on that, and then Sabah.
So I think that is an amazingly important question, Carla, and very important, because the reality is that the normalization was achieved in a tripartite way. It was the UAE with Israel with the help of the United States, who is obviously a very close ally of both UAE and Israel. And China looms large in this equation. Israel has a strong relationship with the US, but an increasingly warm relationship with China, as does the UAE. The problem is that that doesn't always make the US happy. And in particular, what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, which will blow your mind, is that China won a big contract to operate and to build, not to operate yet, but to build the Haifa port, which is one of the biggest ports in Israel in the north of the country. And that upset the US because that was considered the home port of the US Sixth Fleet. And the US didn't like that idea. And now there is all kinds of, it's beyond rumors, discussion going on that Dubai Ports World will come in and compete with the Chinese, believe it or not, on operating that port, which makes the US very happy. Can you imagine, I mean, in this kind of a normalized environment where an Emirati company is now going to operate one of Israel's largest ports, home to its Navy and the US Navy? I mean, it's just, this is really sort of end of days kinds of things that are very exciting. And the trick is, how do we do this in the context of increasing enmity between the US and China? That's a difficult dance to do, but I think we'll figure it out. Sabah?
Hi, Carla, how are you? It's been a long time. Zachary, we've got to do this because it's become a reunion for me. We've got to do this more often. For me, look, the UAE, it's not there's no exclusion. It's a very inclusive country. It always has been. When you look at China, I don't know if you know this, but you should take a look at this organization called Hella China that started with Miras in Dubai to build a cultural bridge between the UAE and China. I think that from my point of view, looking at business where we become sort of helpful to bring, or not helpful, but one center where Israeli, Chinese, and other country tech can form the same melting pot as we have seen in things like hospitality, tourism, energy. I think that this, to me, is more of an opportunity. I do not see it as necessarily leading to exclusivity. So it excites me quite a bit. Zachary?
So with your expertise, Sabah, in asset management and in the financial advisory business, one of the questions is, to what extent do you see asset managers and investment consultants being an important conduit for capital in this new bridge? Do you expect that larger investors will look to deploy capital through those platforms or predominantly directly? What does this mean potentially for the fund management industry, for the investment consulting industry, for the investment banking industry as conduits for this cross-border investment?
Mr. Kremer, long time. So what I see that you're going to see lots of different roles. There is the pure financial investment, let's call it pipeline. And as with anything, you're going to see the asset managers take the lead, be it existing asset managers or new ones that spring up. I think that is how you normally do it. I think where you'll see more direct investments is when you're talking about institutional investors, some of these super large family offices, and also all the operational joint ventures. So again, I see this as a potential for growth. I see it as a large opportunity on both levels, and it's not exclusive, just one actually complements the other.
If I could comment a little bit here as well, I think that in general, we're in a period where democratization of access to the different asset classes is sort of the dominant, term in the investment zeitgeist at the moment. You take something like that we're involved in, venture capital. Venture capital has been the most sort of exclusive club. If you don't speak the language, if you don't know what preferred stock is, or preemptive rights, or anti-dilution, you don't know your way around a venture term sheet, no one's inviting you into it. You find a nice startup you read about in the New York Times or in the National or in Haaretz, and you want to invest money. You can't call your broker at Goldman or Morgan or UBS. They don't have access to it. If you want to invest in the venture capital asset class, until now you had to write like a $5 or $10 million minimum check to a fund manager. Right? And if you want to get some kind of diversification, you probably want to write to 5 or 10 fund managers, which means all of a sudden you're up at, 25, 50, $100 million commitments. And while people like the Yale Endowment have put 20% of their assets into venture capital, it's unbelievable. Most people, I think, would be happy with 2 or 5%. That's still aspirational. But that means that you've got to be a $1 billion player. So you have a lot of people who are sitting on reasonable sums of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, who've been frozen out. And that's sort of the rationale that we rode in terms of building our crowd, to provide more, more transparency, more access, and the ability to use today's technology, like this conversation, to provide leverage and help to companies. Because the way you get good deals is not by outbidding other people in venture capital. It's about adding value. It's about helping your companies grow, which means helping them raise lots of money, but it also means helping them, put together the right teams, make connections to the right partners, get into the press, figure out what the right strategy is. And if you don't provide that added assistance, you're just not going to get the right deal flow. So the idea is, if you can actually build large, communities of investors who are working together with software and with today's, advanced networking, then perhaps we can, and especially when you take two countries like the UAE and Israel, who I think are going to have so much in common, we're going to not only be able to move capital, but we're going to be able to move value, which is really going to attract, I think, most interesting kinds of entrepreneurial deals.
And that actually ties in perfectly to our next question from Ahmed, who has asked, What are some of the promising opportunities resulting from this alliance? He's highlighted communication information technology, electronics manufacturing, but what are, someone else has actually also asked about COVID technologies. Maybe again, starting with John this time, what are some of the key technologies and key knowledge transfers that you think might happen as a result of this bridge?
Well, I think obviously COVID's a great place to start. We have an amazing company going after the vaccine, bunch of companies doing testing and other things. And I think that anything having to do with healthcare in general, not just COVID, will be a primary focus. I do believe that mobility, it turns out that Israel's very strong now in sort of next generation mobility. We have about 20 companies in our portfolio. And there's this steady pilgrimage of all the major manufacturers, whether it's in Asia or in America, to Israel. And I think that you guys in particular, when you look beyond the car, it's going to be very interesting to develop some of this stuff. I know that Dubai Ports World has invested already in Hyperloop, and there are other different activities, but I believe that mobility will be an interesting focus. I think that EdTech, there was a question here before about education and training. I think one of the great challenges has been to get investors, properly interested in this as a financial reward. I don't think you have any problem anymore, given, the fact that a billion students are learning from home. And I see it with my grandchildren, who are doing more Zoom and teach me things about how to use Zoom because they're completely addicted to it to get their schooling. I think that EdTech is going to be a hot area in general of venture capital. And I think that'll be another area where we can work closely together with the UAE.
Dr. Sabah, any other opportunities that you could highlight?
I'd throw in, for example, agri-tech is I would see as a very important one. That's agri-tech is quite important for the UAE. I would also say that the opportunities are not just sector-based, but also if we look at certain other issues, not just about demand, but as John was talking about, value. So two things that come to mind. One is the cost of energy in the UAE is relatively cheap globally because it's domestic. There's no logistics costs, insurance costs, and because of the cost of extraction is so low. So high energy manufacturing will have an advantage. That's why you have cables, aluminum here. You also have two other things. The second thing is we have a tax advantage in the UAE over Israel. So I think expansion, if you want to expand, that these tax advantages, there's a sales tax, but there's no corporate income tax. And the final thing is moving human capital. I mean, in the UAE has become a center for the GCC and even for many of the subcontinent markets because of quality of life. I mean, every time I've been involved in recruiting a foreigner to move to the UAE, we found out very quickly that the number one most important stakeholder, more important than the candidate themselves, is the spouse, okay? And if the spouse is not happy, quite often it's the wife. If the wife's not happy, nothing's going to happen. So we actually ended up mobilizing to actually show the spouse, the most important part, the quality of life, the quality of schooling, education for their children, the security, the personal security here, and so on. So I think that we'll see interesting opportunities both in terms of domestic demand in the UAE, but also as a UAE has certain interesting global connections, and Dubai Ports is one of them. I mean, if you want to work in that area, be it the ports, be it logistics, be it tourism, there's having a connection, be it energy, of course, having a connection with the UAE it's not just about the domestic demand, but also using it as a platform to many other markets to which the UAE is already plugged into, and vice versa with Israel.
Yes. Look, there was a question, Zachary, before about ESG, which I thought was interesting in terms of impact investing. It was one of the earlier questions I wanted to address. We're very keen on this notion of the double bottom line, where you can both invest to make money and do good at the same time without having to sacrifice either one of those elements of the double bottom line. Many of the companies that we're backing are companies that are going to feed the world or solve energy crises or make mobility easier or develop new forms of food tech, provide greater security, from predators online. And my sense when I'm talking to a lot of the people in the UAE is that this is also increasingly important, that people want to not only use their capital to, create more capital, but they also want to do good. And I think that this is going to be a big area of cooperation between the two countries, which will bring in third party and fourth party countries as well. There was another question there about, what's the role for people like India, and we talked already about China, but this is not just about bilateral ties. I think that what's happening is we're living in I just published a LinkedIn newsletter post about this a day ago, that the whole world of investment has simply, changed, okay, in terms of becoming, so multilateral and so multinational. Startups today, even if they have 10 people, are a baby multinational. And if they're not going to be successful. And I think that it's not just about how to work between the UAE and Israel, but then how to get either manufacturing in India or in China, design out of some Italian firm, okay, and that's really going to determine the winners, okay, those who can really, communicate cross-border, who can mobilize investors cross-border, who can mobilize talent to come to your locale like the UAE or Israel. This is how companies are going to win going forward.
So you've touched upon so many points, and we're almost out of time in this session. We could easily go another couple of hours. But for the benefit of everybody in the audience, one of the last questions that Lottie had asked was, what are some of the best ways, what are some resources for the audience to keep ahead of these developments, to continue to stay on top of what is happening? Can you recommend any resources, advisors, anyone who's highly plugged in to be 2 steps ahead of these ongoing developments?
Okay, first of all, what I would do is I would follow Sabah al-Banali, Sabah, on his LinkedIn account, okay, and do the same for me. You can also follow me on Facebook. I've got a newsletter. You should, I'll make a shameless plug for our crowd. Join us, okay? We are, communicating with our base 2 or 3 times a week. So if you don't want, contact and information, then stay away. But if you want to get information about what's going on in Israel and entrepreneurial activity around the world, and especially on this, please do join us. Doesn't cost anything. If you invest, obviously, we take fees and carried interest, but to get information and, join the 55,000 strong who are doing this today, and I think you'll find that interesting. Anybody who would like to contact me can do so directly by email to john@ourcrowd. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be happy to send our slides if Zachary will either send them out himself or give us the names, and we'll make sure that we stay in touch.
So Dr. Cefaratti.
So I think what's important here is that to stay up to date, it's going to be grassroots, right? We don't have, it hasn't been institutionalized yet. So whenever you see people are getting involved, if you're in the Emirates, I've seen our crowd already do one webinar with Emirates Angels. So Emirates Angels in the UAE is trying to work in promoting information about that. Emirates Angels is a nonprofit, and they have another one coming out in a couple of weeks. So just keep looking out for these providers of information, and there's a lot of it. And I think you'll be seeing the opportunities whizzing by.
So I think probably the last question that we have time for from a Jewish merchant family in the GCC, they have asked, what are some of the current or potential legal hurdles resulting from the UAE-Israel alliance when doing business in either country? Also, in terms of working with law firms in the UAE, are Israeli companies happy to consider working with UAE law firms, or would they prefer Israeli ones? Are international law firms obliged under Israeli law to set up a branch office in Israel to work on Israeli-related matters? It would be good to know if there are any kind of legal nuances or challenges that might.
The law firms have started partnering. So, for example, I know that Herbert Smith Freehills here in the UAE has partnered with the two largest law firms in Israel. So what you're getting here is already the law firms and other service providers who can help this. They're partnering with each other because they have global presence anyway. They're partnering with each other to provide those services. So that I just wanted to answer that because there's a lot of law firm and legal talking about. But I'll hand over to John for the other.
Yeah, no, look, I think that Israeli lawyers are often international lawyers. I mean, all my lawyers in Israel have degrees like Sabah does from American universities. Some of them are admitted to the bar in America and in Israel. And I'm sure that's the same in the UAE. So today, we were asked a question earlier about where do our laws come from. Today, there's pretty much a very close uniform sort of in the more advanced countries, both investment and sort of venture law or business law. We talk about the same kind of term sheets, and right now you do not have to, in order to do business in Israel, you do not have to have an Israeli lawyer. It's usually a good idea. But if you work with somebody who's smart, the way that we're in right now in the process of negotiating term sheets and whatnot, and we're doing it with a variety of lawyers on both sides. I think they're UAE lawyers talking to Israeli lawyers, and they're writing documents in English. And that's the way of the world today, in my opinion.
Well, thank you so much. We are completely out of time. There's so many questions that I didn't get a chance to get to. We have still 19 open questions. The slides from this session will be emailed directly to everyone who was registered. So no worries to everyone who's been asking. There have been so many requests for the slides coming through. Thank you again, Dr. Sabah, Jonathan. This has been so enlightening, such an exciting session. We had such a high attendance today and such a high engagement from the audience. So it really shows how much excitement there is around this topic. Our next session, our next AIM Summit session will be the $30 trillion funding gap for the third energy transition. That's going to be sponsored by Assetly Investment Partners, taking place on Wednesday, the 7th of October at 4 p.m. Gulf Standard Time. Speakers will be José, María, Aznar, the former president of Spain, and actually myself. I'll have the pleasure of speaking on that session. Please join us next week. Please remember, if you're joining us on YouTube or after the session, please like our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you again so much. Please, I would definitely recommend follow Dr. Sabah, follow Jonathan Nedved. They are great people to follow, great resources. They're always posting things that are incredibly stimulating and enlightening. So if there's one thing I could recommend to do after this call, go click to follow their channels. It's certainly been a great resource for me. Thank you everyone for joining the session.